All right.
Hey everyone, Pat Belliveau again. This is part 3 of the hang with Greg Bush, and we just left off with Dave McMurdo, trombonist and band leader from Toronto, deceased for a number of years now, but had his own big band, and one of his saxophonists, who both of us know as being a prankster and practical joker, Alex Dean, had his clarinet up and a lighter underneath it. Anyway, yes. I'd never heard that story. That was quite something. But anyway, you said, I have to admit, but I could totally see him doing that because I know Alex is that kind of guy. So now we're going on to, you said you had another Dave McMurdo story, and we were at 27 minutes. So just to break it up a bit.
We wrapped up the second video with a cliffhanger, so we'll get to it. But first, a word from our sponsors. No, just to add to the anticipation. So I mentioned the name Mike Malone, who was working at Mohawk College, kind of when I was there and McMurdo was there. Mike Malone is a wonderful, beautiful trumpet player.
And these are all Toronto-based musicians we're talking about. Right?
Guys, yeah, and a very, very good big band arranger composer. And like the nicest guy going, like really the super nicest guy going. So he was another guy that managed to luck into a college position without not only did he not have a master's degree, he never finished his bachelor's degree. So he's teaching at Mohawk College, which he got on the strength of his reputation and of course and his ability as a musician and the fact he's the nicest guy going. But throughout his career, his life, I guess, wanting to like go back to school and finish his degree because he would have dropped out of school like many of us did to go be a pro sort of thing. So when I was at Mohawk on the sabbatical replacement, Mike was on a sabbatical to go back to school to get his bachelor's degree, and he was close enough that he could wrap it up in 1 year. So of course the students, they're third year students, I guess, and he's such a lovable guy. They love Mike, of course. So they're like, okay, we're gonna go see Mike's senior bachelor's degree recital. The guy's in his 50s, right? Doing this degree. And would you like to come? I'm like, are you kidding me? Yes, I would love to go. And I didn't have wheels at the time. Would have been when I was there without my family. So one of the kids was like, yeah, I'll drive, and this kid now lives in New York City and he does some kind of jazz journalism or something. Dan Cross is his name. Nice kid. So Neil McVeigh would have been in the car.
Really? Okay.
Ask Neil about this. Neil McVeigh would have been, hi Neil, in case you're watching. I think it was Dan Cross, Neil McVeigh. Maybe those guys remember who the other one was because there would have been 3 of them and me would have made 4. So I'm in the back seat, and this would have been after Mike's recital, which was very good, of course. I don't think it was before, it was after. We're leaving Toronto, right? And they start telling me this story about Dave McMurdo. Dave was the kind of guy that you knew what he had for lunch and breakfast that day and probably dinner the day before by looking at his shirt. He had half the meal on his shirt. So anyway, this would have been maybe still in the day when you could smoke in the class, but anyway, so the arranging class would have been pretty small, 4 or 5 students, and they're gathered around the piano while Dave is demonstrating something, and they've all got their coffee cups on the piano, right, which they shouldn't have, the grand piano, whatever, no, it's down. Oh my gosh. So Dave's eating his lunch. Right, it's a tuna fish sandwich. Now I'm not squeamish. We could be eating, and you could be telling me about turds and blood and guts, and the really gross stuff. And I'm like, yum. It wouldn't bother me at all, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so they're saying, okay, they're gathered around the piano, the coffee cups. I said all that. He's eating his tuna fish sandwich. And one of the kids, Siri just kicked in. I guess tuna fish sounded like Siri, so she kicked in. She said,
we're not talking to you.
I'll turn it off. But even when it's off, sometimes it kicks in. So anyway, I guess. So anyway, one of the students, he's looking at the keyboard and stuff, and he kind of reaches. He's not paying attention. He reaches for his coffee, gets the coffee cup, and he takes a sip, and he's like, part of Dave's tuna fish sandwich. He picked up McMurdo's, and he got the backwash.
Oh God.
And this really affected me. I
Oh.
had to say to Dan, I was like, "You need to pull over now." And he thought I was kidding. I was like, "No, no, no, you need to pull over now." I said, "Please pull over right now. I'm gonna freaking hurl." And they're like laughing. They're like, "Don't hurl, don't hurl." I was like, "You better pull over." And I open the window. I'm like trying to get fresh air and stuff. So he pulls over, and I get out, and I start taking deep breaths and stuff. And they're freaking howling, you know. But I didn't lose my lunch. I regained my composure. And then we're
Oh
freaking
God.
hysterical. I was like, that's equally disgusting as it is funny. We're like freaking dying. I'm almost positive Neil McVeigh was in that car.
Okay.
The next time you see Neil, ask him.
I'll have to say, because I'm going to post these on Facebook that we've done these, and I'll say, Neil McVeigh, please skip ahead to part 3, because just to confirm that you were there for this, and I'll see what he says. Neil McVeigh
Yeah.
is I teach, for those of you probably, most people are probably already know, I run the jazz band and teach saxophone at Ambrose University here in Calgary, and Neil is our guitar teacher, and is probably, if not one of the first call, maybe even the first call guitarist in Calgary right now. I mean, as
Yeah.
far as the jazz team is concerned, anyway. So anyway, it's a mutual person that we know. So
Yeah. I think Neil would have been in a couple of my classes. I think on that sabbatical replacement, I think he would have been in second year. He'd have to correct me on that or concur. But Adrian Ferrugia, whose name came up a bit earlier, wonderful piano player. Well, he's on my one and only CD. Adrian was at Mohawk when I was there, but he was in third year when
okay.
that I was there full time, and I didn't teach any third year courses. So as much as I hung out with Adrian and stuff, and I mentored him a very little because he was playing so well already. But I think Neil and those cats were a year behind him. Neil can correct me on that. And then there was and he's on might not be on your Facebook thing, but he's on mine and on Neil's, and I see posts and stuff. Chris Wheeler. So I'm, first day of class or whatever, and I'm reading through the roll call, and I guess I hadn't put together where Kenny Wheeler had. I knew where he'd grown up and stuff, but I hadn't really put it together. So just as a joke, as I'm reading through it, getting to the names, I'm like, okay, so and so here, president, this, and I'm like, Chris Wheeler, yeah, here. I was like, oh, Wheeler, cool. I was like, you're not related to Kenny Wheeler. I was like, yeah, I am. I'm like, excuse, because Kenny Wheeler and Woody Shaw.
Mhm.
And well, okay, I'll throw in Bobby Shue too. Those guys are my heroes, I'm like, what? And he's like, I said, are you serious? Or are you putting my on? He's like, no, it's my great uncle. It's my grandfather's brother. I was like, okay, Chris Wheeler, A. He starts.
Just by the name alone, you pass.
So yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Okay, now I have 2 stories for you based on people we just talked about. Okay, so
Good.
the first, so one is just a quick Alex Dean story, and I totally lost the other one now. Wow. Okay, that's just not right.
Well, segue to the other story you had.
Alex, I adjudicated with Alex in a music fest here, and it was because you and I are both Yamaha artists now, and I've been with Yamaha since 2002. Before that, I was with Julius Keilworth, whatever people want to call him. I call him Keilworth. Kenilworth, yeah, right. Named after the city in New Jersey. So Alex, you might know the name Brian Lillos. Did you ever know that name?
Yeah.
Brian contacted me to adjudicate Music Fest. It was here in Calgary. And he said, because it's a Yamaha-sponsored festival, we have to not say anything about you being with Keilworth. And Alex Dean was with Keilworth at the time, too. I don't know if he still is or not. He might be. Anyway, so we're trying to keep it, we're just not mentioning that that were endorsed by this other company. And I remember, I think Alex kind of took that as a bit of a, kind of weird thing. But I remember he got up to talk to one of the bands, and he was thanking sponsors. And he got to Yamaha, and he said, "I'd like to thank Yamaha too, that company that makes musical instruments, motorcycles, snowmobiles, and an additive that makes soup thicker." Of all things.
And an attitude that what?
Additive that makes soup thicker. And I just went, okay, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Because I think he thought, like, the whole way that we were not mentioning anything about us and what we did or who we were sponsored by or whatever. And I think he just thought that was kind of crazy. So he had to let loose with something at some point. And what was trying to think of the other, I hate that. There was one, and can't think of what the other story is. Anyway, if I think of it, I'll throw it out there again.
Yeah, well, while you're thinking, I'll tell you a similar.
I don't know if I can think. I think it's forgotten now.
Okay,
anyway.
my Bob Mincer story at the I think the one and only Jazz Educators Network convention I went to, which was
St. Louis, 2010. Oh, okay.
I was in Louisville, Kentucky.
You were at the one with me in St. Louis in 2010. I have a photo of you and I and Bobby Shue and Wayne Bergeron hanging out front of the motel, the Hilton we were staying at.
Me in a picture with Wayne Bergeron? No.
Yes.
Never met. Really? I've never met Wayne Bergeron.
Okay. How about I pull that up and email it to you? Because I know it's you. I don't know who else it would be.
So I would have forgotten that I was in a picture with Wayne Bergeron? Weird.
Well, who the hell else would I have been hanging with?
Okay, well,
I thought for sure it was you.
We'll check that out.
The only other person I could think it would be there's a drummer colleague friend of ours, John DeWall. That's the only other guy I could think of who it would be, but I thought for sure it was you.
St. Louis.
Sorry?
I don't think I've been to St. Louis.
Okay.
Yeah, check that out. I think Mincer was playing with the military band, and he's playing an Eastman saxophone.
He endorses for them.
Yeah, still?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he does.
So, well, I hope I'm not going out on a limb here. So maybe I shouldn't tell this story, but.
Oh yeah, tell the joke and don't tell the punchline. Go for it.
So, well, my recollection was that the time in the concert presents itself where he needs to talk about who he's endorsing. He's got the saxophone. He's like, yeah, I play this Eastman horn. Yeah. And then they start the next.
Yeah.
That was about it. I was like, okay, I wonder what that means. But if he's still playing them and endorsing them, I guess they're okay. So
yeah, as far as I know, he's still with them. So
I guess maybe he's just at a loss for words, and that's all they can listen.
Oh, I'm so pissed that I can't remember that other story. Oh.
Yeah. No, that's and musicians are pretty funny people most of the time.
Okay, so after your time in Hamilton, then what happened? So you were in Hamilton from 1990 to 93 or something.
I was in Hamilton I taught at Mohawk around 94, 95, I guess, probably 95. And then, and at McMaster. And then I moved to Texas in 2003 because I was always after that elusive tenure, what they call tenure track position, you know. And I applied for a job at the University of Winnipeg. This was before they had their jazz program, their jazz degree, and I didn't get it. And at the same time, I had applied for this job in Abilene, Texas, and it was one of my colleagues, the guy that directed the concert band, and I think he'd been a trombone player before he kind of got into academia. He didn't play a whole lot. And he was the one that sent me the job ad for the one in Texas. So I applied for that. And then I was like, yeah, you watch, the one that's like the farthest away probably be the one that comes through. And I never heard from them for the longest time. And then I did hear back from University of Winnipeg, and they were like, yes, thanks, but no thanks. And I was like, I always ask that question, what can I do to strengthen my application for the future? And the guy had said, and he's like, well, your application was pretty good, but we already have a trumpet player on the faculty. We didn't want another trumpet player. We wanted something else. I was like, yeah, fair enough, whatever. And then, yeah, so then first, I'd given up on the one in Texas, and then first, I get a phone call. And he's like, would like to schedule a phone interview with you. I was like, oh, okay. So then after the phone interview, they're like, well, guy calls me back and he's like, we'd like to invite you down here for an interview. And I went down and ended up getting the job. But what was interesting, there was a variety of things that factored into it. So Abilene is about a 2.5 hour drive from the Dallas airport. So they arrange to they foot the bill. The schools will foot the bill for these things when they bring you in. They put you up and everything. And so they're like, yeah. I'm trying to just collect my thoughts. So anyway, I get another phone call. It says like, okay, so normally we would have flown you here from Dallas, but we can get this package deal that involves the plane ticket to get you to Dallas and back, and then a car rental for you to rent a car and drive yourself to Abilene and then drive yourself back to the airport. And it's a sweet deal for us. We would save a lot of money if you would be able, amenable to doing that. So of course, you want to get the gig, so you're going to say yes to everything. I was like, yeah, sure, shouldn't be a problem. So that's what happened. So I'm driving, and it was fairly easy to get from the airport. The highway system's all laid out and stuff with appropriate signs, and it wasn't an issue. So, but as I'm driving, see, this is in May, beginning of May. I'm seeing all of these billboards advertising air conditioners. you know, so imagine being in Canada and it's October or November and you're seeing all of these billboards for furnaces, right? But it's Texas, the ads are for air conditioners. I'm like, holy jeez, what the freak am I getting into? So I was like, okay, well, whatever. So then I'm like, I knew that I was going to be taken for dinner once I got there. So, but I was starving. So I was like, well, I'm going to stop somewhere and get a bite to eat, but I got to get out of like this heavy traffic area first. So I'm somewhere in some suburb of Dallas and I forget the restaurant and I go in. And of course, there's the displays on the wall and they've all got guns in them. I'm like, what the hell am I getting into, for Pete's sake? Oh my gosh. So I just had some kind of a snack, and then I drove on to Abilene and got settled into the hotel, and I probably did have a phone back in those days, and so then the guy that was taking me out for dinner, we connected, and yeah, he takes me out for dinner. So at one point, and we're at a Tex-Mex place, so of course you can't see the island here in my kitchen where I am, but you can imagine it's the size of an average kitchen with an average size island. So they bring the plate of food out, and the plate of food probably would have covered this island here, right?
Just in case you hadn't eaten for a week.
Portions is so big. It's like, whoa. Anyway, so at one point he says to me, well, I'd like to ask you a question if I can. I was like, no, whatever. He's like, well, we're not supposed to ask. And I was like, okay, well, thanks for prefacing it with that. He's like, how old are you? And I think I was 51. This is 14 years here, for 18. No, I was 48. I was 48 years old, 48 or 49 years old. Yeah. So
Why did they need to know that?
he was curious, I think.
Okay.
Because they're not supposed to ask. But because it wasn't in the interview, I was okay with it. So then they set me up for, oh yeah, and then let me back up a little bit. So about a week before the interview, about a week before I'm supposed to go for the interview, he calls me back and he's like, so, because I had to play some music, right? And the deal was, because it was the Americans love their titles. I was director of jazz studies. There was a big band, a combo, and a jazz methods class. That was it. That's their jazz program. That's their jazz department. But they love titles. You know, talk about being the principal tuba player in an orchestra. They love titles.
With one tuba.
So anyway, I was like, yeah, yeah. He's like, well, we'll hire a rhythm section. It's not a jazz program, but the cat wasn't a wasp.
Right.
Alan Teal, who plays, you know, he's a percussionist, a classical percussionist by his training, but he plays the drums pretty darn good. He can swing okay, you know.
I know there are people watching and go, what the hell does it mean by wasn't a wasp? But, well, another story for another time. That involved me. Yes.
So
Continue.
anyway, and then they hired a bass player and they hired a piano player to play some tunes and stuff. So I was like, he's like, yeah, we'll have a good, decent rhythm section for you and you'll be able to play some tunes. I was like, great. So he calls me up about a week before. So he's like, yeah, so about that performance. And we're like, yeah. He's like, you need to play something classical. I was like, excuse me? It's like, you need to play something classical. I was like, I haven't played classical music in years. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, it would be in your best interest to do that. And I was like, I really haven't played classical music in such a long time. It's a total different genre. And I have a problem playing the jazz stuff. I'm in shape for that. And he's like, yeah, let me just reiterate, it would be in your best interest.
Yeah. Is there any part of that sentence you didn't understand?
So anyway, I'm like, okay, I can do that. And he's like, okay, well, let me know when you pick something and fax me the music, right? So I'm going through my stuff and I'm like, there's no way I can handle like Haydn's or whatever, that stuff, because it just didn't have the endurance to do that for that genre, you know. You got to play with your horn on your face, you know, for quite a bit of time in some of the movements. So plus just the sound and the articulation, I wasn't on that stuff. So I picked pretty much a high school level contest piece that I knew I could play because I'd helped so many high school kids prepare it for their audition into university. Mm-hmm. So I send this, I get a phone call and he's like, yeah, so that piece you sent. I was like, yeah, I know. I said, but my chops aren't up for Haydn, man. He's like, yeah, I get that. He says, but it's not much of a substantial piece. It's not very long. I was like, yeah, well, I think that's the best I can muster. He's like, well, it needs to be longer. And I was like, I don't know, you know, we could repeat some sections. He's like, well, could you like improvise an introduction to it? And it was like, I could freaking improvise an introduction for all day in front of that. And he's like, well, perfect. Why don't you do that? I was like, oh yeah, that I can do, you know. And I mean, I understand the concept. You use a couple of themes from the piece that you're going to be playing, right? It's just not random bullshit. So I send the music along, the piano part. So of course the cat that's teaching the piano, he either didn't practice it because he thought he could sight read it, but he couldn't sight read it. So he's screwed. I'm having a rehearsal with him, and he's screwing it up. He's like, "Can we start again?" And so now, whatever kind of nervousness that I was feeling to have to play a classical piece, I'm like, this ain't gonna be a problem because he's shitting the bed on it, you know, worse than I ever. He's playing his accompaniment part to this high school piece worse than I would have played the Haydn trumpet concerto. So finally, you know, he figured it out, and I was like, he's like, well, how will I know when you're going to be coming ready for me to start the piece after you do your big elaborate, you know, solo trumpet cadenza introduction? And I was like, well, I'll finish with the theme of the tune and then I'll look at you and we'll hit it, you know. He's like, perfect. So so I played that, and he screwed up in the same place that he screwed up in the rehearsal. So I was like, oh, and it was obvious that it was him screwing up and not me. And I was like, well, that's cool. So again, you know, whatever nervousness I might have had, I didn't have anymore. And it's not like he screwed it up to the point where it was a complete train wreck. It wasn't. He was just fumbling. So we got through that okay. And then we did the jazz quartet stuff, which was fine. And then I ended up getting the gig. And I remember after the fact, because it's a Christian school, right? It's a religious school, evangelical topic.
Like hardcore.
Hardcore topic for another video, maybe. So he said it came down to me and another guy, and they decided that because the other guy was Catholic And I was coming from the Anglican, they call it Episcopalian down there. I was coming from an Anglican thing. They thought that Anglican was closer to an evangelical than Catholic. So that factored into it. And then the fellow was telling me that the guy that didn't get the gig, he called to say, and he was a year or two younger than me, I think. So how old would I have been in 2003? What did I say?
You said 48.
I was 49 in 2003.
Okay.
So yeah, and that would have been in May. No, would have turned 49 in June. So anyway, oh, and the day that I went, it was 92 freaking degrees the day of my interview. So anyway, the colleague at the school was telling me that the other guy was like, it's because of my age, isn't it? It's because of my age, because I didn't get the gig because I'm so old. And he was like, actually, Greg's 2 years older than you. It had nothing to do with your age. So anyway, I got the gig. And then many stories from those 4 years.
Well, that's why we're going to obviously have a huge video series here.
What a freaking place, man. Welcome to Texas. Oh, let me tell the Whatna story.
Okay.
Pat came down to Abilene, Texas to play with the big band. And while he was down there, somebody was it a wedding or a birthday party? It was some kind of a gig.
Somebody's house with a pool.
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah. And I had this Hawaiian shirt on that it was all colored and everything. It was quite, needed a volume switch, but it was one of my favorite shirts.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so it would have been a rhythm section and you and me. And yeah, we talked about it before you came there because they were like, you think Pat would like to do the gig? I was like, well, I'm sure he would. I'll ask him. And I was like, and then we can just dough to pay him because I think we got you some extra dough to do that, didn't we?
Yes, you did. Yep.
So anyway, so we're playing this thing, and I don't know, you were swatting some insect.
We were walking towards the bar, or there was a barbecue, like they had a barbecue pit going or something.
Yeah.
And we're walking towards that, and all of a sudden I feel this swat on my back. And I'm like, what? And I turn around, and it's what's his name again? Alan Teal. Yeah. He said there was, I can't remember what something about there was something flying around your back or something. Said, but it wasn't a wasp. I said, oh, I think I might have said, oh, I'm glad it wasn't or something. I can't remember, but wasn't a wasp. So I was just picking up the Texas lingo, That's what I was doing with that.
Oh man.
How do you spell that? Wudna. I guess it's
my other
WDDNA or something.
My other favorite Alan Teal story is a very, very nice guy and a very good musician. I remember doing a big band gig with him one time down there. And I was like, after the gig was wrapping up, I was probably done around 11 or 12 or whatever. I was like, okay, so where's the hang, And he kind of chuckles. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, he says, I know what you mean. He says, go hang out after the gig, and grab a pizza or a beer or something. I was like, yeah, let's do that. And he's like, yeah, no. He says, there's nothing open here. I was like, he's like, we're not in a big city. I was like, oh. He's like, yeah, sorry, no hang. So anyway, they sure enough do love their H's down there, Pat.
H's, yeah, and Dr. Pepper.
What? And Dr. Pepper. So it's like, what and why and where, and I don't know why it's not hoo. So I remember in my garage suite pulling up, and the secretary, I would suspect she's retired now. It's been 14 years since I was there. They had three vehicles. Their kids were growing up, so she had a Lincoln. Her husband had a newer SUV, and then they had this big old huge white Suburban that they used for hauling shit and their gardening, and they were avid gardeners and stuff. It was older than the other ones. So she was like, Greg, anytime you like, you can come and you can borrow that thing, and you can go do your groceries and this. And I was like, well, I got my bike and I can walk to the grocery store. Well, have you been to the Super Walmart? And I was like, Super Walmart? No, I've been to the one close to the school. Oh, no, you got to go to the south end of town and go to the Super Walmart. I was like, okay. She's like, you're going to need a car to do that. And, you can borrow it. And I was like, okay. And so I did. And then she's like, you might as well keep it parked at where you live, which was like a 5-7 minute walk from her house. So anyway, so I show up with this big white Suburban, and I park it in the driveway to my garage suite, and the landlord's out there and he's painting something. He's on the ladder. I can never forget this. So he looks at me and he's like, I was coming out to get in it. I guess the car was parked there, and he goes, I said hi. He's like hi, and then he goes, is that your big white vehicle? And I'm like, whoa, this cat's really got it happening, you know. And I was like, yeah, it's like one of the ladies at work landed.
He's got the lingo down.
He's got it down. So,
Well,
yeah.
One other thing that I recall from that trip, the name of your lead alto player, was it like Casey or something, or
Casey Bingham.
was it Casey? I can't believe I remembered that.
Yeah, man.
I remember in rehearsal, he turns to me and he says, so you're from Canada, huh? And I said, yeah. And he goes, do you speak French? And I said, well, I do a little bit. He said, oh, really? He said, I thought you'd speak fluent French. And I said, well, you know, truth be known, where I live in Quebec are almost right across the other side of the country. So I turned to him and I said, do you speak Spanish? He said, no. And I said, well, you're closer to Mexico than I am to Quebec. So that's
I had to unfriend him on Facebook.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, well there were some funny stories about that case. He was like, I think he was a political science major, and he was quite active with the school Republican Party and stuff like that. So I get him going, and I remember one time we were in the big band, and I was like, well, you know, we burned down your White House, right?
Oh, you told me this, yeah.
And he's like, what? Because they won't teach that
It'll
shit.
be, what?
Well, yeah, and I can hear one of the trumpet players in the back going, he's trying to bait you, Casey. He's trying to bait you. And Casey's like, so I don't think they teach that shit down there. Now, of course, it wasn't the Canadians that burned down the White House. It was the United Empire Loyalists, right? But it's close enough as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, we were getting ready. So we'd get into it sometimes, but he was very respectful. They all were. So they were doing this huge performance at the school, and we're setting up, and I think I probably said something to the effect is like, so you guys are going to invade Iraq, aren't you? And he's like, he looked at me, and he's getting his horn out of his case, right, as he's saying this, as I'm saying this, and he's like, I don't need this stuff. I don't need to hear this anymore. Mr. Bush, he says, I'm tired of that. He puts his horn in his case, he closes his case, he starts to leave. We have this big concert and he's the lead alto. So anyway, I had to like eat some crow and apologize and assure him that I was going to stop, you know. So, and the other kids are like, come on, Casey, Mr. Bush is just messing with you, you know, suck it up. And I was like, okay, fair enough, great, Casey, probably overdoing it, you know. But then with all of the shit that was going on with Trump when he got elected, I ended up having to unfriend him. But with all of the shit now that's been going on with COVID, I'm still able to send him a text through, even though we're not friends, I can still send him a text through Facebook Messenger. So I did about a month ago, 5 or 6 weeks. I said, so Casey, I said, how's Trump working for you now? And he replied, to his credit, he replied.
Oh, he did,
you know?
okay.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, you know, it's because I, you know, was in a Republican doesn't mean I condone all of this stuff and yada, yada, yada. And I wrote back and I was like, whatever. So you guys voted him in. Let's deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, one person who's still friends, I know on Instagram for sure, I think on Facebook too, is Jeff Tips.
Jeff's a sweetheart. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe after I post this, maybe he'll go on and listen to, or check out this one, part 3. And you know, I'm just looking at my timer here, and we're like at 33 minutes.
Ooh, we need to wrap this up too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were trying to keep it at 20. So
yeah, we did a great job on that one. Yeah. As I suspected, we'd go nuts. But anyway.
It's 4:30 my time, it's 5:30 your time. So
it is, yeah, exactly, right on the nose. Yeah.
Yeah, so we should wrap that up.
Okay, I'm gonna stop this one.
Part 4 coming up.
Okay.